to mention a few points that he made here that I feel are quite important. He said there is no inherent meaning in any object, and this is true. The meaning that we assign to any object, what that object represents, comes from our use of that object, our preconceptions about what that represents or how it can be used. And I think it's a great reminder that the general perceptual ability that we have with our eyes and also the connection cognitively comes ancestrally through evolution from successful ancestors who came before us, the ones who were not eaten by lions, the ones who did not fall into holes, the ones who were not killed in a storm because they didn't understand that a storm was coming. We inherit the benefit of that survival mechanism, but also the biases that come from that. This is why, there's something called the fight or flight instinct, which is where you see something that's a threat. Could be a lion in the bushes, could be a car coming at you, could be a person who's about to, you think, maybe attack you, and you have to make a split-second decision about whether to fight against that thing or to run. Usually better for all that just to run, but the interesting thing is that even when we're in situations where we don't have that kind of primal threat, we can still feel that emotionally. I'm drifting off of perception here a bit, but have you ever had something make you really mad? And let's say it was something that was not physical, like you get an email from somebody or a text. Hey, I'm not going to make it today, sorry. And you feel that emotion, like almost like you're vibrating or your head gets fuzzy, you're so mad or so disappointed. That comes from that fight or flight instinct. That rush of adrenaline that you get that makes you feel terrible in that moment, and you feel that very physically from something as simple as a little text message. Right, passively in your hand. And that's not necessarily a good thing, but it's what happens when you take animals like ourselves that have this primal swirl of emotion and perception and then put us in front of mobile phones and computers and so on. And the kitten example I mentioned to you with the kittens in the box who are not engaged with the physical world, he didn't mention that here, but when he talked about people who are interacting with mobile, there's nothing wrong inherently with mobile, but if the first time you learn about something is on a mobile phone through an app as opposed to actually interacting with that thing directly, that's going to change your understanding and your perception of that thing, of that real thing. And this is really just something to be aware of. This is not an assignment, but when you leave today, when you go and forget about going home, just when you leave this room and go to wherever you're going next, try not to look at your phone. Just look around it. It probably sounds crazy, right? Try just to not look at your phone between here and your next class. If you're really brave, try not looking at your phone all the way home. You'll be amazed at where you are and what's going on around you, things you never noticed that are happening all the time. And also what starts to happen in your brain, what you start to think about, what you start to feel. When I was living and working in Beijing, and especially when I was vice president for creative content for Disney in Beijing, I made it a point to walk to work every day, which is a little bit dangerous in Beijing, but almost anything can happen. But it was important to me because I really wanted as a foreigner to soak up the environment because we were creating content about Chinese culture and I'm not Chinese. So it also was just interesting to me. So I would walk, I would take back alleys and narrow streets just to kind of put myself in a situation where I could expose myself to something that I wouldn't ordinarily. As opposed to sitting in a car, sitting in a company car. Disney had a car for me. I was like, no, it's okay. Sitting in a car just flipping through my phone on the way to work. Try to do that. Try to free up. My phone's over there. I was going to hold it up as an example. Here's your phone. Try to free yourself from the prison of that phone. It's a great tool, but don't be boxed in by it. Another thought that comes to mind when we talk about perception is that we don't even realize forget about the phone example. Let's talk about how people see things differently using the most obvious example. Children. When I was in art school, many, many years ago, it's like 30 years ago or more, the design teacher in our foundation program said, when you're looking at an environment, especially if you're with a child, but even if you're not, get down to the child's level and see what's going on. I do this a lot. I've got 2 kids. They're different heights, but I try each level. Claire's getting bigger. Emma's still down here. But see how they're seeing things. Not just to be open-minded in a patronizing way, but you'll realize, oh wow, there's something cool going on here. That's something that you're missing, that they're seeing. On the other hand, you'll sometimes see how we don't think about the very audience that we're trying to serve. I cannot tell you how many times I've been to children's art exhibitions here in Taiwan. I'm not just blaming Taiwan, but I see a lot lately, where the kids who are coming in are down here, and guess where all the artwork is? It's all up here. And the kids can't see it, it's like way up there, because it was hung by some idiot adult who was like, oh, that should be fine, right? Because I'm way up here. And then I think, well, yeah, the kids are down here. VR, there was a VR, generally you want to keep kids out of VR anyway, it's something that you want to have them use later, but this was for older children, but still, the VR headsets were hanging so high that the kids couldn't use them. It was a disaster, such a basic fundamental thing. Nobody even thought to actually have some kids come in and test it out. So when I was in art school, again, many, many years ago, we did an art show with a local kindergarten, and we went into the kindergarten, we worked with them for 2 days, drawing, painting, sculpting, the kids were doing all the work. And then when we hung where we had a show in the student gallery of the Art Institute, and we hung the work right about here, like right that line that's straight onto the wall, that's the height that we hung the work. And the kids loved it. And the cool thing was that when the parents wanted to look at the work, the parents had to all get down here. It was great, and that loosened the parents up. The parents were having fun, and then trying to get back up, not so fun. It's like, oh. But still, it changed the way people saw and interacted with the environment. Okay. Enough pontificating. Let's look at the next example here. The second one is called, do our senses reveal the world, illuminate it, or do they obscure it, do they cloud it? So, James, if you don't mind, kick the light. So that's something that many of my artist friends find quite depressing, especially those who work with color and consider themselves to be colorists, and spend a lot of time on thinking through the juxtapositions of one color to another in their work, especially those of my friends who work abstractly, such as I did, to hear that people who are perceiving that are probably seeing it completely differently than you as the artist created it, and that everybody else is perceiving it, can be a depressing thought. It's very cool, but if you're into controlling how people see things, the realization that you're not really in control of how people filter that is pretty sobering. And as I said at the beginning of the class, before we even get to philosophical, political, social interpretations of things, just the fact that at the most basic level possible, color, form, we're seeing things differently is something that we should keep in mind. This helps you in general as a person. I try to be open-minded. Like most people, I struggle with that, primarily because I don't realize when I'm not being open-minded. When people aren't open-minded, they never usually are standing there thinking, I'm not being open-minded and I'm fine with that. They just don't know that they're not being open-minded. So the sooner you can understand that you are seeing things, not only thinking, but you are seeing things different from other people, helps you out. So it's like, all right, I should not assume that people are seeing the same things I'm seeing. I should not assume that people are coming to the same conclusions I am, or have the same thoughts about what to do next, etc. It's just kind of logical from that point. What he said towards the end about celebrating uncertainty is something that I think is important, and I've mentioned this in probably every class I've taught here to artists, to creators, that the uncertainty that you feel about what you're doing, the dissatisfaction you might feel when you finish something and think, oh, I could have done a better job on that, or why couldn't I do a better job on that? This is a good thing, because this puts you in a mode of trying to understand things better, trying to understand other people better, trying to understand yourself better, trying to understand what you're doing better. Whenever you're in a situation where you think, I know this, or I got it, I understand, you're kind of closing off your ability to see and realize the fact that maybe it's different than you thought. Maybe what you're looking at is not exactly what you think it is. Maybe there's something that could be learned in a situation that you think you understand already. I think of religion. My parents, I was raised as a Catholic, a Christian, but just with more decoration. And my parents were Roman Catholics, and I kind of like lost that, and my parents were like horrified. They said, "Oh my God, are you an atheist?" I said, "No, I'm an agnostic." And it's like, well, what's the difference? Right? Agnostic is just a person who's like, well, I don't know. I can't say that I know what's going to happen or not happen. An atheist is somebody who says, I know there's no God. A person who has religion says, depending on the religion, most religions have a God. I know there's a God. A Christian would say, I know there's a God. An atheist would say, I know there's no God. An agnostic would say, I don't know. And we'll see what happens. So that uncertainty, I'm not recommending anybody become an agnostic, but it's working for me. But I'm not here to advocate a religious point of view. I'm simply trying to illustrate the point that I think throughout my own life I've found that when I'm in an uncertain state, when I don't know something, it's not comfortable, but ultimately it's valuable. It ultimately leads me to a place where I can do something or understand something that improves my situation, my understanding, and ultimately my ability to function. That's a great presentation on so many levels. You can bring the lights up, Jane. And I think that it has a lot to say about the artistic spirit, and then also fundamentally about the human spirit. There's so many good points that he makes there in terms of the ability to be awestruck by something bigger than ourselves, and to maybe have that moment of awe, not from something big, but from something that might be small or intimate, but also how to deal with conflict. And I like when he says that conflict is essential. I think about how many times, I mentioned earlier the fight or flight instinct, when you see something that bothers you and you have a reaction to it, you have an emotional reaction. And that emotional reaction is from instinct, but then hopefully your intellect takes over. So if somebody says, oh, you know what, I can't make it, your emotional reaction might be anger, but then you think, okay, wait a minute, they probably have a good reason, etc., and you calm yourself down. What happens, of course, is that many people act out of emotion. This is why you should probably never make a decision when you're feeling emotion. Wait at least 5 minutes, take a breath, maybe wait a day if it's something big, so you can really step back from it and understand it better. As a creator, we encounter conflict all the time. Conflict with ourselves, in terms of the ideas we're creating. If you're working with a team, you'll have conflict there. And this conflict is essential. Working with a teammate, working with a group of people is how you make your project better. So I was thinking about this as I was preparing today's class, because I'm working with a friend on a project. It's a science fiction project. We've been working on it for a while, developing it kind of on the side. And yesterday, I've been feeling pressure because I'm trying to write something and get it done so we can show the project to some people who are interested in it. So there's no real deadline, but some people said, hey, this looks pretty cool, can you pitch it when you're ready? So it's like kind of getting it ready. And then yesterday, he went and suggested something that just rips everything open. Like it's a huge change in terms of the focus of the project. My initial emotional reaction was like, what? I actually laughed. I didn't get anybody to laugh. Oh yeah, right, like that's gonna happen. But then I thought to myself, wait a minute, let me put myself in his position and try to see it through his eyes. We hadn't had a chance to talk yet. He just sent me a message, hey, I'm thinking we should do this. And I was just kind of stunned. What Beau said about entering conflict with a question was important. I wasn't processing this in this way consciously, but this is what I was doing. If I entered that conflict with resistance, like, hey man, no way, we don't have time for that, that would have gone over quite poorly. But even before I talked to him, I thought about, okay, well, what if we did do that? Like, it doesn't hurt to think about it. What if we just changed it in the way that he's suggesting? And I thought of some really interesting possibilities creatively that then we can have a discussion about, which we're going to have next week. It's like, oh, hey, I've been thinking about what you said, and it leads to some interesting thoughts, and have a discussion, and then see out of that where we end up. Maybe we'll keep doing what we're doing, but modified by what he suggested. Maybe we'll completely go with the approach he wants. Who knows? We'll see. But by being open-minded and going into the conflict with questions about how each other's looking at it, our perception of things, we have a chance at arriving at something great, better than either one of us could come at by ourselves, versus just kind of like hunkering down in our own preconceived notion of how the project should be and what's good. It's difficult. You know, working with other creators together is difficult. And you could even have the struggle within yourself internally as an individual. This is one thing that I found from living overseas in terms of changing your space, changing your assumptions, and widening your understanding of the range of possibilities. Putting yourself in a new situation, an unfamiliar environment, a difficult situation, can really open your mind, open your eyes to what's possible and how you can redefine yourself. There are a few things he said here that I just wanted to call out to wrap it up, and then we can take some questions. He talked about the confirmation bias. This is something I think about a lot. We see it in organizations, we see it in people. I have relatives who voted for Trump, and I couldn't believe they voted for him in the first place, but then what I really couldn't believe is that even as evidence after evidence after evidence mounted about what he was doing, what he was not doing, how they were basically being conned by this, so-called billionaire who basically had no respect for the people who he claimed to, represent, working class people. He's got lawsuits against him by laborers who he's screwed because he hasn't paid them. They still would hold on to their belief that he's cool, because it's more painful to realize, oh shit, we made a bad decision and we've been suffering for it for 4 years and we're part of the problem because we voted for this guy, than to say, no, he's fine, you're wrong, you liberal, whatever, and to hold on to your preconception. You see people do this again and again and again. You make an emotional decision and then you justify it logically. I used to think that you make a decision based upon intellect and then you support it with emotions. I've come to realize, and I've seen this in myself and others, that most people make a decision emotionally and then they justify it intellectually. You fall in love with somebody, it's just all emotion, and then you rationalize why that person is right for you, even if your friends are like, I don't think he's so cool, and your mom and your dad are like, I don't like this boy, but you're like, he's fine because da da da, and even the pushback you're getting from people about what's wrong with that person is what you use to justify why you should be with them, because nobody's going to tell you what to do. Right? You make an emotional decision. I want a new watch. It looks cool. I love it. And then it's like, I can afford that because I'll use it for work, so it'll be fine. And you justify, you rationalize the initial emotional decision. Just be aware of that. That's why advertising works so well. Because advertising gets you to, Apple's very good at this, gets you to experience an emotion, and then you'll go out and plunk down, 30,000 NT for a phone that maybe you don't need. You can still use your old one. So it takes courage, he said, to admit that we don't know things, to put ourselves in that position where we say, I don't know, is something that we feel the pressure to do the opposite, to say, yeah, I know, and to look competent and like we're on top of things, because we feel that if we say, I don't know, this is something Buddhism has, right? The I don't know mind, which is to go into a situation not assuming you know anything. It's something that as I get older, I realize I don't know anything. I have a lot of knowledge, most of which is no longer useful, but I realize that some of the things I was especially when I was younger, I was very certain about. Now I have no idea, or I'm open to other points of view. And this relates to the third point in my mind that he talked about when he said, what was once useful for you may no longer be useful. This is really important. There are skills and abilities and tendencies you have that are very useful for you right now that might be a problem for you later. I'll give you a personal example. I'm an artist, I work in CGI, I was a Disney computer animator, and I did stuff directly. I rigged and modeled and painted and made stuff. Then I became a supervisor and I had to supervise people. And later I became a vice president and was like overseeing a team of people creating stuff. Because I had made things myself, my tendency and my ability was to get in, give me that, I'll do it, and just get it done. The worst possible thing I could do as a supervisor, certainly as an executive. Even though I could do it, because it's micromanaging, it reduces the morale and the effectiveness of the team, it reduces my ability to delegate and use the collective wealth of the group for our own advantage. So that ability to do things myself, which is good, was also something I had to be conscious of later on could be a problem, and to kind of let that go. And I kept it, I learned to keep it for things I'm doing by myself, but not to let it poison, I use the word poison, the spirit, the environment of the group, the collective. So what may be your strength, what might be useful to you now, may not be useful to you later. If you can understand that, and you'll probably understand it once you experience it, because somebody talking to you, blah, 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 like I'm doing now, is much less effective than when you go out and experience it. It's like, oh, wow, I just learned something. This is why with your parents, I always like to talk to students about their parents, because I know how it is. My parents were supportive, but also worried. I understand, as an outsider, somewhat about Chinese culture and people who have parents who are supportive of what you're doing, but also really worried. And they're worried because of what he mentioned, the fear of uncertainty. Many of your parents, your relatives, have lived through some pretty tough times themselves. They've struggled through uncertainty, and the last thing they want for you is to suffer that uncertainty as well. Even though they may not realize that nothing's certain anymore. The idea of security and certainty is an illusion, right? I think we've learned that in the past 2 years. There's no such thing. But they are still at least hopeful there is such thing. And when it comes to perception, if you're ever arguing with your parents or wondering like, oh my God, why are they treating you like a kid? Is because when you get to perception, when your parents look at you, guess what they see? They see 5-year-old you. They do, I swear to God, they see, because as they get older, I asked my mom, I said, when you look at me, what do you see? She said, I see the 5-year-old who I walk to school. I start crying in a second. But it's natural, and they want to protect that 5-year-old. So I just mentioned this, it's kind of a bit of a tangent, but when you find yourself, again, entering conflict with a question, with understanding, when you find yourself in a situation with your family, with your coworkers, with yourself, struggling, try not to resist it, but try to question it and see if there's a way you can use that to your betterment, your growth. All right, enough of me. Any questions on this or comments on things you saw?